Am I on there? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, again, my name is John Price. I'm with the State of Washington Department of Ecology. I've been working on radioactive waste cleanup around the country for about 35 years with the Department of Ecology for the last 15 years working in Hanford and Hanford cleanup. So I'm going to go ahead and give you an introduction. We won't spend too much time on the slides, John and I, but I want to give you a little bit of background. So the first slide up there is a map of the Hanford site, and the blue ribbon there near the top of the map is the Columbia River, 45 miles of undammed, free-flowing last stretch of non-tidal Columbia River up there. It's a real gem of the Northwest. That's the Hanford Reach National Monument. So that's something we all want to focus on protecting. And so for the past 25 years, the Hanford cleanup is focused on cleanup along the Columbia River. And it's getting pretty close to done. Probably another, I guess we'll say tonight, another 6 years until that cleanup is complete. And then meanwhile, the center of Hanford, and you can see there's a 200 west area and a 200 east area shown up there. That part of Hanford that not as much cleanup has been done. And that's mostly the changes and schedules that we're going to talk about tonight is for the Central Plateau. And there's probably another 50 or 60 years to go there, another $115 billion. Not a lot of that is tank waste. And we're not going to talk about tank waste milestones tonight, but that is a lot of the work up there. So next slide. Okay, so why are we here tonight? So the Hanford cleanup has to have investigation and cleanup work. And I'll have a slide here in a minute and I'll explain how investigation and cleanup goes. And the three parties, the US EPA, Department of Ecology, and Department of Energy have a legal agreement between the three of us called the Tri-Party Agreement. And that divides the $115 billion worth of work into 16 major projects with deadlines to finish each major project. And those are called major milestones. And then those major projects are divided up into schedules every year or so, and those other schedules are called interim milestones. And so tonight we're talking about, I think, 4 major milestones, and I think John will say 64 interim milestones and major milestones that we looked at. So it's an awful lot of schedules that we're talking about changing. Those milestones are really important, and one big reason they're important is that those milestones are identified to Congress every year. And there's a legal requirement for the Department of Energy to ask for funding to do all of the milestones that are due in any one year. Congress doesn't have to give the money to do those milestones, but the Department of Energy does have to ask for that kind of funding. And so milestones get changed all the time. We've had over 450 changes of the Tri-Party Agreement, and 3 big reasons they get changed is we get new information. So when there's investigation and new things are found or we understand things better, then there's new information to change those milestones. Occasionally milestones get missed for different reasons. Either the Department of Energy has technical challenges, or sometimes even the Department of Ecology will take longer to review some of the documents, and that allows DOE to extend out the milestones. And then also, if Congress does not appropriate funding in any given year, that's a reason to change milestones as well. And so whenever we do significant changes on milestones, we're required to allow for public comment, and that's what we're doing here tonight. So go ahead and next slide. So I talked about investigation. So here's how we go about investigation in very simple terms. So the upper left-hand corner there, you see a pile of binders. So we always start out with paperwork. There's a plan to do the investigation work. And once that plan is approved by the Department of Ecology or the Environmental Protection Agency, then the Department of Energy goes out and does field work, and they'll do things like drilling into the ground, and that's what the next picture down shows, is an angle drill into the ground. And those drilling operations are done so that soil samples can be taken out and sent to a laboratory, and that's what you see in the next picture in the top center is laboratory samples. And once those laboratory samples are analyzed for chemicals and radioactivity, and that's you see a chemist down below there doing the analysis, then that results in more paperwork. So we do lots of paperwork at Hanford. And that results in a report, and that report identifies what are the results of the chemical analyses, and it also says what the Department of Energy proposes as far as cleanup alternatives for the problems they look at. And regulatory agencies look at those, and then we also have public comment on those cleanup alternatives, and that's what you see in the bottom picture there. Next. Okay, so after those cleanup alternatives get talked about and a decision is made on cleanup alternatives, then there's actual cleanup. And so I've got a few pictures. I like pictures better than just words, so I got a couple of pictures to illustrate that. So one of the big things that's been done at Hanford as far as cleanup is digging up contaminated soil, putting it in a truck. You can see a picture there. And that truck gets hauled to a lined landfill in the center of Hanford. That's the picture you see in the middle. There's also an awful lot of contaminated buildings at Hanford. In the central part of Hanford, there's about 400 contaminated buildings, some of them big, some of them small. And those buildings get knocked down. You see a picture in the lower left-hand there. And when those buildings get knocked down, there's things like water spray to keep down the airborne contamination. And then the rubble from that knockdown gets put into a truck, and the truck goes to that lined landfill again. Besides soil and ground and building contamination, there's also groundwater contamination. So on the right-hand side, top picture, you see a groundwater sample. In this picture, it's green because there's lots of chrome in it, and that's a sample down on the river, but it kind of illustrates the point. And then when groundwater contamination is identified, there are plans and projects to pump that groundwater out of the ground and put it through a treatment building to remove the contamination. That's what you see in the lower right-hand picture. Okay, so we're here tonight to talk about changes to TPA milestones. So again, what are milestones? There's major milestones, which are the end of a big project, and that cleanup work takes place over several years. And interim milestones help set the pace and also identify funding needs to get to a major milestone being completed. Again, really important, the Department of Energy must request a budget every year to do the milestones that are due in a given year. And those milestones, the way we lay them out over the years, reflects the priorities for investigation and cleanup. And that's one of the things we want to ask for tonight is any ideas you have about priorities. Okay, again, why are we here tonight? Why are changes needed? Because we have prioritized completing work along the river border, and that means we've done relatively less work in the center of Hanford compared to along the Columbia River. And we now have more information to schedule the work in the Central Plateau. One of the reasons we need to have more information is we have been doing some investigations, looking at records and so on over the years, and so we do have a better understanding today than in 1989 and 2000 and so forth about what the work is in the Central Plateau. And the current schedules require more resources of different kinds, money and trained people and equipment and so on, than we think are currently available. And just as an example, the work that DOE should do to comply with this year's TPA milestones would cost about $1.9 billion. And we think the budget this year is going to be about $1 billion. So there's not enough money resources needed to do all the work due this year. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to John Bishop.
Okay, thanks, John. So, John talked about we have to go characterize the work up on the Central Plateau, characterize the contamination, and then secondly, we have to decide what to do and then go do something about it, right? So, Central Plateau is a big area, it's about 10 square miles, and we don't make just one single decision on what to do. We have to divide it up into small pieces and analyze those pieces. Those pieces are determined by similar types of contamination or similar types of geography. So what we have here is we're looking at the central part of the Hanford site, and that's what's showing up here. I know this might look like an unfolded Rubik's Cube to you from back there, but the whole point here is that the colors up here are what we call optimal units, and this is the decision areas that we are going to go characterize as a unit, in this case gold, and then make decisions about what to go do with those contamination in those areas. And you can see here there's about 10 of those decision units. So to tie this back to what John said earlier, is we have a series of milestones to go characterize each of those regions up there, and then a series of milestones to go clean up those regions. So let's talk about those now. So we have what we call the M15 milestones. That's a number out of the tri-party agreement. And these milestones are really a series of milestones for us to go write that stack of paperwork that John talked about earlier, that a plan to go characterize how many samples are you going to go take in each of those regions, how are you going to analyze them, what analytes or what chemicals are you going to analyze for, what radioactive constituents are you going to analyze for. And so that's a series of F-15 milestones. Now, we're not talking about a small number of samples or analytes. We're talking about tens of thousands of samples, probably hundreds of thousands of analyses run by the chemists that we showed earlier. So there's a whole series of milestones that we have up on the Central Plateau that deal with these what we call remedial investigations, feasibility studies, and ultimately they result in what we call a record of decision. A decision that has public involvement, that the Department of Energy proposes to Ecology and EPA what characterization to go do and what to do beyond that. So we'll talk about the F-15 milestones a bit more later. So once you understand the level of contamination, both chemical and hazardous, then you have to go do the cleanup, right? And the cleanup could be a number of different things. In this case, it's excavation of contamination. It could be leaving that contamination in place and putting a cap over it. It could be removal. So there's a whole series of F-16 milestones that once we decided what we're going to go do, we actually have to go do the cleanup. Now, there's a set of facilities out on the Hanford site. They're unique, and they're called canyons. And they have their own series of milestones, and that's the M85 milestones. And these canyons are called canyons because if you stand in one, they look like a canyon. Now, to get this, this is about 1,000 feet long. It's about 80 feet wide, maybe 80 feet tall, a third of it underground and two-thirds of it above ground. Of the 5 canyons, 4 of them dissolve nuclear spent fuel on the order of 100,000 tons of nuclear spent fuel with nitric acid primarily. They're highly contaminated. They're very thickly shielded with concrete. That's why they were built that way. The concrete in some cases is 4 feet thick. The 5th canyon, U Canyon, never did process spent fuel. What it did do was recover uranium from the tank waste that had already been discharged to the tank. These canyons have their own set of milestones because they are unique facilities. There's 5 of them, as I mentioned, up in the Central Plateau. We'll talk about the proposed delays we have in these milestones. But really, these facilities kind of travel alone because of their uniqueness, their size and their structure, in particular the thickness of the concrete. Now, there's a series of milestones we'll talk a little bit more about later. These are the M37 milestones. And these really deal with RCRA, or Resource Conservation and Recovery Act waste sites. These are scattered throughout the Central Plateau, and they're separate from the circle of cleanup, but they're integral to geographically. So we all have to talk about those a bit too. And finally, we have the M94 milestones, which are down in the 300 area. Now, for those not familiar with Hanford, 300 area is right here, and it's about 3 to 5 miles north of the city of Richland. Because of that proximity to the city of Richland, it has special significance to us all. There's 3 main cleanup initiatives remaining in the 300 area, and those are the subject of these M94 milestones. One of the major cleanup initiatives remaining is this 324 building, which is a highly radioactive, what we call a hot cell, where they did very radioactive experiments. That would have been done, we believe, by 2018, but for we discovered large amounts of highly contaminated cesium underneath it that had leaked out of that building. And it's about 13,000 rad per hour, which is very, very high. So that stopped us in our tracks, and we proposed delaying that to 2021. Now, we believe that the cesium is staying underneath that building because we have groundwater monitoring wells in this region between the facility and the river, and they are not showing elevated cesium at this time. The other 2 facilities are burial grounds that are north of the city of Richland. The 61810 is there, and 61811 is there. They're very similar in nature, the 2 burial grounds are. One is approximately half done. We'll finish that by 2018. The other one isn't started, but the unique feature of that is it's right next to the parking lot of the operating commercial nuclear reactor. And there's some problems there, but the milestone we propose is 2021. So the final set of milestones we'll talk about tonight is the M94 milestones, which deal with those remaining facilities in the 300 area. So let's kind of trying to wrap this up and trying to figure out, put a big picture of what we propose doing. So we talked about the series of milestones and 15s.
Have meeting dates or meeting times, so that has excluded a large part of the population from being here at this meeting today. And so I would like to see the agencies collaborate better with public interest groups that are effective at turning out people to these meetings by giving us more time. And I would also like to see public engagement happen in a more meaningful way. Not everyone wants to come to public meetings. And these issues are highly technical. And I do want to say the changes that you've made to your presentations from what I saw in Richland, I give them a thumbs up. The explanation was better, but I think for all of us to understand really what's happening in Hanford, having more town hall meetings, state of the site meetings, focus groups, roundtable discussions where we can really hear about these issues at a street level in English, not in Hanford, would really benefit the public and maybe get more people to then come to these public meetings to give comment. But we need to figure out how to make public engagement meaningful, because as you say, you want the public to be involved and engaged. And that's my comment.
Thank you. Karen Hardy.
My name is Karen Hardy. I'm from Hanford, and I really have appreciated the meeting tonight. I'm sorry for slightly late. I would second your last point there on getting the public more involved. It's been hard to talk with people about this in the long history of cleanup and that sort of evolutionary process of where can the public be most helpful. You know, there's been really combative, confrontive atmosphere for a very long time. And, you know, it slogs on. It just slogs on. I think meetings where we were talking about what would happen with an earthquake and some of these more volatile, dangerous areas would be a very important discussion to have in our communities. And I know that takes money for the personnel to get it set up and do all of that, but it's probably a tiny amount of money compared to, you know, what the overall cleanup. So if we are interested in generating more money, you know, and so I can remember in the 90s talking about flatline budgets, like why do we keep just underestimating, well, not underestimating, but under asking for the money that's really needed, and then, you know, and then you get half of that. It's like more people involved with the dangers that are in front of us, lobbying for more people connecting on those issues. It sounds like what we need. I mean, I appreciate that the cleanup is going on, and you know, I appreciated hearing that it's 45% of the overall EPA cleanup budget. I never knew that. So there are lots of things tonight to be involved. So thank you for having the meeting. We can have more group meetings, smaller groups in between these larger meetings. I would vote for that. I really hope we don't have a earthquake. We need to solve this problem.
Thank you. Jerry?
Jerry Paulette for Part of America Northwest members tonight. I want to start with our comments by pointing out that Governor Jay Inslee has said repeatedly that having enforceable milestones and schedules was a fundamental principle for Hanford cleanup. And the state of Washington has gone to court for that principle in regard to vitrification plants. And actually won a major court decision when U.S. District Court Judge for Eastern Washington in mid-August found that not having an enforceable schedule led to a lack of accountability on the part of the Energy Department. And what was being argued in that case was the Energy Department's view that they wanted to first study the problem, then develop their proposed schedules with their contractors, and then they would have milestones. Does that sound familiar? And the question is, why are 43 miles of trenches and all the contaminated soil sites on the Central Plateau not being given the same fundamental principle that you have to have enforceable milestones in place to drive the work? Without enforceable milestones, you have no funding. There's no legal requirement for funding. And what we've seen repeatedly is that the state of Washington EPA have made the same mistake over and over again. And to me, it's very disconcerting, and to the public, it's very disconcerting that you haven't learned the lesson. So when you replace enforceable milestones with, quote, target dates, unquote, for retrieving waste from burial grounds, just 6 or 7 years ago, I believe, the Energy Department at public meetings said, but we'll ask for the money and we'll still get the money for it. And what happened? They didn't ask for the money, and state and EPA could not enforce missing schedules for that. And it's put us significantly behind. So having deadlines is essential. Having a deadline for retrieving waste from contaminated soil sites is not rocket science. We know what it takes to retrieve the waste from the burial grounds and contaminated soil sites because of the work done along the river. Yes, some sites may take longer when you go in and you discover the contamination is worse, but we already have learned that from the work along the river, where they didn't know there would be spent fuel and transuranic plutonium wastes in those burial grounds, and now we know how long it takes and what the cost is to clean up burial grounds like that. So the question is, why would we not have a firm milestone to say you have to complete the soil site cleanups by the year, and based on what we're looking at, we believe 2030 is the reasonable time frame. And the safe and risk-based time frame that's appropriate is only to extend it 6 years. Now, this brings up the issue of notice, as Abigail from the Riverkeeper has brought up, because we were given this set of rate change packages to be public on October 26th. The first public meeting was November 4th. I think we're now 23 days after this was released. We barely had enough time as a public interest group to delve in and look at the comparison of risks. And here we are, and the agencies are saying to you, the public, trust us or tell us what you would trade off. That's not fair. Because you rely on the public interest groups to do that research and say, well, wait a minute. The agencies haven't disclosed one word about the level of chemicals in those trenches and what those potential risks are and how fast they're spreading. What is the level of carbon tetrachloride, and is it at a level that is actually immediately dangerous to human health being spread from these trenches? Yes, it is. What is the risk of delaying that? What is the risk of explosion? You won't find that there. What is the risk to groundwater from a delay of 15 years when containers in the ground are deteriorating? We don't know. Well, and how does that compare to the 618-11 burial ground by the Energy Northwest Columbia Generating Station nuclear reactor parking lot? It's got serious risks, and not one word about those risks were in the agency's materials. So it's up to the public interest groups to try to present those risks to the public. That takes a few weeks for us to do. And then we have to review it and put it out in notices to the public. And as Abigail pointed out, there wasn't one mailed notice about these public meetings from the agencies. So their email list is much smaller than the U.S. Postal list. And what is their open rate on their emails? Not very high. I'll link to that. So it's not a surprise that we don't have a lot more people here, because had our public interest groups had time to prepare a mailing and do the turnout that we do, we probably have got a lot more people here tonight. And that brings up the final notice issue, which is what we have heard. We've been fielding calls for 3 days at Park American Northwest from people who are just plain old pissed to have found out that the meeting was started at 6 o'clock tonight. How many of you would have, How many of you would have preferred a meeting at 7 o'clock? The agencies told us that our groups asked for the meetings to be changed from 6 to 7. They told us they were. Your convenience, it should not be driving whether or not a meeting starts at 6 or 7. It should be the community's convenience. And I know as an elected official that if I scheduled a meeting at 6 o'clock when people couldn't get there, I'd be bounced out of office. And it is unacceptable for you to have not listened to and work with the community groups in scheduling these meetings, including choosing the dates, giving us enough time to do turnout and do informed turnout. Because I think we've got to recognize that we're simply years ago gave up on the notion that the agencies were going to give you informed notice. Meaningful notice in the public involvement world is notice that tells you how a decision might affect your values. So just putting out a material that says we're changing the date is a meaningless thing. I mean, what is an M15 to you? Did the materials that were put out, did the mailers say there are 43 miles of unlined trenches? Sorry, not there. So it's up to the public interest groups to tell you that. And if you're going to partner with us, you need to partner with us and collaborate with us, or not pretend that you actually give it down. I'm sorry that's harsh, but given the effort that the public interest groups put in, we have to be harsh, because this is not the first time, it's not the second time, it's not the third time we've had the same experience. And there has to be a consequence for that. Finally, I want to close by pointing out that if you apply the rationale discussed tonight for putting in a date to be determined instead of a major milestone with a firm schedule, what element of Hanford cleanup would survive? Because that rationale is what the Energy Department, as I said, tries to apply to the education plan schedule and to removing tank wastes. And literally it applies to anything. There would be no deadlines for completing any major area of cleanup at Hanford under the rationale that we'd like to study it first and then propose with our contractor what the schedule should be. What that means is that It's based entirely on the budget priorities of the Energy Department, which can't be trusted. We've talked a lot about how you can talk to members of Congress. I would urge you to talk to U.S. Representative this side of the river and U.S. Representative on that north side of the river, because while everyone says we ask for money for Hanford cleanup, the fundamental issue is that if your member of Congress says that they support slashing discretionary spending, that means your member of Congress is supporting slashing this portion of the Hanford and the Energy Department's cleanup budget. And when they threaten a shutdown over something, that has a real impact, as Sean, I think, very honestly talked about tonight. I appreciate that, because it has a real impact. And so when legislators, members of Congress say, I support funding Hanford cleanup, but they next minute tell an audience that they want to slash discretionary spending, they want to eliminate the Energy Department and EPA, then you need to join in holding them to account. Because what they're saying is, this is the type of program that they don't care about. And it is very hard when you look at the Ecology and EPA budgets. EPA's entire staff are overseeing some of the largest cleanup and most complicated and dangerous contaminated site in the Western Hemisphere is, I believe, 7 people. 3 people now? 3 people. And they're responsible not only for this site, but some of the other most contaminated sites in North America. So they're trying hard to do their job. Let's encourage them and give them our support by saying hold firm and insist on firm deadlines that you can enforce. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last person we have signed up for comment is Sue Ludner.
I just would like to say again that I think the management of the money, so you said that you guys are flexible, so if you can, like the pool that you brought up, you know, things like that that are obviously a higher priority because they're more dangerous, you could push the money that you have towards working on those things. If you could enforce them, like you said, if you could speak to the deadlines. Those are basically, you know, just stick with the plan.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to make a formal comment tonight?
The other thing I was going to say was monitoring. I'd like to know more about monitoring, like what is actually getting to the river and what the levels are and how fast they are reaching the river. That was what I meant.
So thank you everyone again for coming out tonight. I wanted to mention, and maybe you can consider this notice, at least notice of another comment period coming soon. We were out in 2013 and again in 2014 to talk about decisions for the river corridor, 300 area and 100F area. There is another decision coming soon. We anticipate in the February timeframe for a proposed plan for work along the 100D and H reactor areas along the Columbia River. So we anticipate public interest here in Hood River. See a lot of familiar faces here tonight. Obviously the river is very important. So we will be sharing more information about that as the schedule kind of materializes here. But please look for that, and we hope to engage with Abigail, with Riverkeeper more, and Jerry as well, and other interest groups to ensure that folks have enough notice to come out, and that the time is right, the location is right, and everyone's able to engage on that issue and future issues. So thank you again, and have a great night.